My name is Aja, and I'm a Caribbean-American surrealist blues poet, or what I'd like to call a word musician. And I am fluent in the art of wandering. I've spent the past several years of my life using art and poetry to organize my community in grassroots movements and explore my interior world. One of the most expansive and transformative places we can travel is within. I was born in a country where to use words the way that I do at one point was punishable by law. For those colonized by culture and language, we share a struggle to understand and communicate the depth of who we are. I want to thank you all today for sharing space with me and offering an opportunity to be listened to. I was once told, whatever country you first visit in the continent is where you are from. My first wandering to the great land of ancestors was actually to Senegal for an art biennial with two visual artist friends. I tagged along for the camaraderie, exercising the privilege of owning a Western passport drenched in colonial ghosts and bloody borders. At that point, I was new to international travel, only recently visiting Paris, where a poet friend from America was living at the time. It was very important to me that I visit a place called Gorée Island. This is where I first met the door, a symbol of rupture and rapture. It was strange to me how beautiful it was, a quiet that wails of stories untold, the voices splashing against the edge, an eerie space of wind and light, a place where West Africans were exploited and brutally assaulted before being betrayed into slavery and shipped to the white patriarchal colonial project of the West. It remains one of the most haunting and yet transformative trips of my life, the door of no return. And here I was, returning. On that same trip, the ocean humbled me in ways that still makes me shiver. I tried jumping off the deck into the water for what I assumed would be a gentle swim, but I almost died. The waves were so strong that no matter how much I tried to swim back to the shore, my arms and legs failed me. And just as I surrendered, as I exhaled my anticipated last struggling breath, the waves pushed me back. It was just as I was letting go of fighting the current that I could actually return. I could only have life by letting it go. There was no way my clumsy arms and legs could ever compete with the vast knowing of the ancient rippling force. I sat in the sand, heaving and exhausted, coughing up my throat, and I cried. I cried a cry that unthundered my shoulders. The earth was a drum and my heart was her heart. I sobbed as I stared at those sentient waves blowing the world open. It wasn't just enough to see the door. I had to feel and experience this place in my body, a way of knowing, a felt experience. I didn't understand at the time, but I was downloading crucial information by way of deep feeling. This talk is for the daughters of the doorway. Daughters of the doorway. Daughters scattered across oceans, tongues, and time. What I hope to share is a poetic offering, an invitation for discourse about what the right of return to the continent can look and be if people of the African continent and the diaspora do it together. I want to suggest a framework for this that I have been referring to as diaspora feminism, an approach or a way into understanding one another and unleashing our imaginations. Diaspora feminism teaches us we feel, therefore we know. While many in the African diaspora romanticize the continent with hopes of exercising a sense of physical agency we may not feel in the Western colonial countries, we must be aware, it is crucial that we are aware, that patriarchy, just like white terrorism, are struggles and battles of the mind and the imagination and the heart. The diaspora is vast and culturally diverse in ways. It disrupts any false sense of universal Blackness that glues us together, and it complicates how we imagine and reflect on our liberation movements. If we are to return to the continent with hopes of fostering deep and transformative connections, We must move differently. We have to move differently and lean into the lessons of new visions informed by our emotional and spiritual intelligence. So many of us in the diaspora know nothing of homeland. It's a fantasy or myth, the first wound we hold in the circle of our palms tenderly, never quite aware of how to hold or be held. The only home we know is to be longing. Our home is a complexion that connects us. As colorism threatens to divide and conquer, through recognition, acknowledgement, and reconciliation, we can restore the kinship. But we must actively divest from the constructs of whiteness as well as patriarchy. The doorway, I realized that day, is a liminal state or existence that has taught me something very critical. We cannot own land no more than we own our very bodies. We are stewards of flesh and blood, earth and ocean. In this liminal space, there's infinite possibilities. It disrupts sovereignty or the notion of nation states. We are not defined by passports or ID cards. Patriarchy harms all of us, and it keeps us from exploring the fullness and the range of our interior worlds. It is a system of thought governed by ego and gender inequality, and it uses colonialism to destruct and devalue community rooted in awareness of the land. Diaspora feminism is a spiritual intervention of colonial categories and borders. Rather than clinging to flags or gender insecurity, we move by way of wind and radical love. What we feel is an expression of knowledge. Our perspectives shift and are transformed by our lived experiences. It guides and informs how we navigate. It's a compass, a lighthouse. We feel, therefore we know. Being of the doorway is to be from here and there. No matter where we go, there we are. Of passages, pathways, portals, of coming and going, leaving and returning, forgetting, remembering, betwixt and between, openings and possibilities, beginnings and endings, dimensions, people of the threshold scattered about, those of us never having truly arrived. It's a life of endless departure. I want to believe that it wasn't always this way. Us teetering on the planks of love, a geography of hurt, that there's a country that chooses us, held like a reunion, a jeweled amulet of awe, a mother's arms grasped like a lover's hands. I want to believe that my broken family would be different without the fingerprints of slavery on our genetic throats. But racism, like patriarchy, attempts to legislate the imagination. Far away inside myself, there are utterances in my blood blooming, ancestral transmissions. There's this shared recognition, a common wordless language, a poem as perpetual wandering. It prepares the spirit for decolonizing, cadenced by the heart. While preparing for this talk, I was researching firsthand accounts from the women aboard slave ships who had gone through the door of no return and crossed the threshold. I realized there weren't any I could actually find. There aren't really any from either men or women. We learn about the treacherous journey mostly by third person, abolitionist journals and accounts. And yet, there was a story of a woman named Number 83 on a ship heading for Jamaica. Her name was Number 83. She was in labor and due to give birth, and it made me wonder about her and who did she become and what was her interior world like, and all the women, all the unnamed daughters who carried their imaginations. The women surrounded in their own amniotic fluid, urine, or menstrual blood in the sweaty, humid hull of a slave ship. Where did her mind go? What world within did she have to uncover? Who did she have to become? What were her prayers? How did she imagine? Who held her hand? Who held her? Could she grieve? We feel, therefore we know. We survived together to feel and to embody self is not gendered. But it is important to know that there are other ways to express, perceive, and experience the world outside of violence, domination, greed, and the acquisition of things. What did we carry? What gods did we unname? What science did we unscience? Where did her thoughts drift? How did they render her? What kind of in-between? This way of unbeing. Years later, I would return to West Africa, to Ghana, this past December. One evening at a festival in Krokobite, on the beach where my friend was performing, I had an experience where words fail me, but I'll try. As High Life legend Ambole's voice whirled in the breeze, I watched a crowd full of beautiful people, all shades of browns and butters, with no threat of white mediocrity or fragility in sight. A mother and daughter twirling about, waving their hips in giggles. Their laughter tickled my skin. I witnessed in awe an overwhelming sense of gratitude. And while I cannot explain what it was, what feeling, what memory, what invisible, unlanguageable thought possessed my body, I sobbed quietly, frightened that anyone would look at this American girl, God forbid, and point to the great distance between us. I felt I belonged, I was a part of, I was from this past, present, future. I thought about my parents, their brokenness. I thought about all the years I've devoted to organizing and resisting in defense of Black life in the US and abroad. I was tired. I am tired. I was angry. So many of our people have died trying to fit in and be accepted where we were never even considered human. And I held this feeling so close that it was my skin, it was my body, and it was me. And I smiled in a way only tears could understand. This was the only home I ever needed. And there is no amount of land or money or success or ownership that could provide that very ephemeral affirmation. We feel, therefore we know. Ari Lennox, a Black American singer who was invited by Afrochella to perform in Ghana this past December. Upon her reflection of her trip, she declared Ghana the most beautiful country in the world. And similar to the intense moment I felt at the ocean's edge, she tweeted about a triggering moment and how her heart ached for her ancestors. Many took to Twitter mocking her vulnerable reflection. Are her ancestors even from Ghana? While I understand the apprehension from Ghanaians toward the diaspora and our experiences on the continent, what is it that causes people to question what we know and therein what we feel? What acknowledgement and healing must be done and how? What way forward can we create without proof or passport? What creates compassion? Efua Sutherland, a Ghanaian author, poet, activist, once said to Maya Angelou, a Black American poet, upon meeting her for the first time in Accra over 50 years ago, she said, "Sister, you have a need of a sister friend because you need to weep, and you need someone to watch you while you weep. Who will watch us as we weep?" Efua knew that Maya needed an engaged witness, a friend. Diaspora feminism teaches us there's solidarity in feeling and sharing space for those feelings to be expressed. As we travel, we need to practice and be in solidarity with one another. Our emotions are always on trial, but who will be our witness? When we hold space for someone, we also hold space for ourselves too. Poetry and art is the only place that has ever given me a license to express myself freely. No matter where I go in the world, there is a Black woman writing a poem, exploring her interior life, trying desperately to find the language for the unlanguageable. A big part of my return was to listen and gain a deeper understanding of the stories and voices of women in Ghana. I spent the past 2 years listening to Black women from across the diaspora and African continent as I worked to create a play that will serve as an advocacy and organizing tool to end violence against women and girls. The play is called Voices by Vide, where the central focus is radical listening as an expression of solidarity. Our hope is to encourage women and those who love us to go inward and confront the depth and the nuance of our truths, to heal and reckon with what needs healing, as if it were predestined. My sisters found me, lovers of language, facilitators of connection, denizens of the archive. I met a young Ghanaian poet who reminded me of myself, organizing for women artists in the efforts of consent and sexual health in Accra with a collective called Black Girls Glow, or the founder of an incredible residency and space for our stories, the Library of Africa and African Diaspora, or a young woman named Jewel who suggested me for this very TED Talk. It was clear that this return was about what I could feel, share, and learn, how I could be of service and an engaged witness to what women were already doing to support and lift up their communities here in Ghana. Diaspora feminism teaches us to surrender, to immerse ourselves in community, to embrace the wisdom of fellow sentient beings and embody what we feel. This is how we come to know and to understand. Often in a fit of defiance, the African diaspora proudly refers to themselves as once king or queen, perhaps a genetic royal relic. We come from kings and queens, we proclaim, an effort to reinstate dignity and resist impoverishment of spirit. But what of the poets? What of the poets who boarded those deadly slave ships off the Gold Coast of Africa? What are the poets, the rebels of the psyche, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters who saw the world in visions beneath visions, who listened for the gestures in the eyes, mouth, and postures in the sweltering heat? Where did her mind waft away to? What moans could she not unsee or feel? Flashes of the devil's brothel on deck. What vengeance was born of her gaze? What silence was kept? What stories unexpressed? There are rooms within rooms of me and no doors. Only ways of wandering, coming and going, split between the living and the spirits to enter or be entered. I am a daughter of the door of no return. Being a daughter of the doorway is about investigating your interior world. It's in there where you'll find love, safety, creativity, and imagination. Some say, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am visions manifest. I lose myself to find myself. A shared memory, ceremonial, a ritual, the choreography of crossing over. It's deeper than some universal code of blackness, some affinity with radical texts, revolutionary figures, or a romance with a one-dimensional Africa. Maybe it goes back to the mitochondrial Eve. As we return, the question becomes, do I love myself? And if you don't love me, can I love myself? And how do we move in the world where love is our political technology? We cannot return unless we are welcomed. We ought to return not from a place of escape, conquest, or domination, but to hover in the beauty of the in-between, to feel, therefore we know. The doorway was the wound that forced me to go inward. Poetry is what I used to process what I found when I got there. Diaspora feminism is a collaboration of care and shifting perspectives. As we leave here today, I would like each of you to reflect upon your own devotion to the structures of patriarchy and colonialism. It's a lot. Within ourselves, how do we carry them in our bodies and minds? I would like for the men and women and non-binary folks to consider engaging with diasporic feminism. It looks like being an active witness in one another's journey as we confront the ways we have internalized colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. We feel, therefore we know. Our emotions inform our freedom movements. Traveling inward is some of the most important traveling we can do. The Black radical imagination was born in a doorway, a daughter daydreaming of another way. Thank you, guys.